All right, so we're going to be looking at the impact of immigration and urbanization on American life during the Gilded Age, because a lot of important things happened during this time. A lot of people were moving into this country, so we need to talk about why and what they were looking for and the reality of their situation as they came to America during the latter half of the 19th century. So if you look at these maps, here is a side-by-side comparison of the immigrants and where they were coming from during the Gilded Age. And so if you look at the map on the left, you can see that there are certain places where immigrants are coming from more than others, that being especially Ireland and England and Germany. And these immigrants were very welcome from this part of Europe because, you know, in Ireland and England, they speak English, and many Germans are also fluent in English. And so as they were coming to America, they were very welcome. They were Protestants, so they were already like the Caucasian Americans living in the United States. And then now if you look at the latter half of the map on the right, you'll see that some dots got enlarged in other portions, especially the eastern portions of Europe. And so from 1901 to 1910, a lot of immigrants were coming from places like Russia, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And as you see as we go through these PowerPoint slides, they're not going to be as welcome for a myriad or for many reasons. So from 1880 to 1921, we have a record 23 million immigrants coming to the United States. Now realize these immigrants are not looking just for jobs, because there are jobs available in Europe. What they're looking for is that opportunity, that American dream that they've heard, you know, Andrew Carnegie was able to build. He's, you know, an Irish immigrant that became the richest man in the world during his lifetime because of the opportunity he had in America. Now, we also need to realize that during this time, the United States did not have a quota on how many immigrants could come from a particular country. So there was no limit. A quota is a fancy way of saying a limit. And of course, if you know anything about America today, we absolutely have quotas on how many people can come over here. As you've seen, there have been issues with people crossing the border and things of that nature. So in 2020, we have limits on how many people can come over, but during this era, we didn't. If you were willing and able-bodied and could make the trip across the ocean, you were more than welcome to take a shot at the American dream. So from the colonial era to 1880, like I said earlier, most immigrants came from England, Ireland, Germany, or those northern European countries. So if you look at the map below, the purple arrow was going to show you where they were coming from during that early part of migration. Now, of course, like I said, during the latter half of the 19th century and the early 20th century, most of the immigrants, at 70%, came from the United States, went to the United States, and they came from Southern and Eastern Europe. And so I would probably put a star by those four countries, Italy, Poland, Austria-Hungary, and Russia, because I believe that's going to be on your quiz over this section of notes. I'm going to ask you where these new immigrants, that's what they were nicknamed, as you can see right here, the new immigrants were coming from. And these new immigrants were typically young Catholic males. Some of them were Jewish. They spoke very little to no English, and their languages are vastly different than, English is. And so, Russian even has a different alphabet than the American alphabet. And so that made it very difficult for the Americans already living in America to accept these new immigrants that were coming over. And to compound that, the majority of these young men coming over during this time are unskilled agricultural laborers, which means they're farm hands. So they're not really necessarily adding to the value, because we don't need any more farm hands. In fact, people are moving away from the farms into the cities during this time. And so the fact that they had little skill, they had pretty much zero education, some of them couldn't even read and write in their own language, made it hard for the Americans already here to accept these new immigrants. Now, if you were immigrating to America during this time, and immigrating, which means you're coming by choice. So you have to realize that Africans, when we were brought here, we are not immigrants to this country. We were forced to come over here and provide slave labor. Now, these immigrants who are choosing to come here, 75% come through Ellis Island in New York. And right there you can see in the picture, the Statue of Liberty was one of the first things they would see as they pulled up onto our shore. Now, what's ironic is the Statue of Liberty was a gift from France, and she was actually modeled after a black French woman. So when she came to the United States, She was actually copper colored. So you had a brown woman welcoming immigrants into this country for a long period of time. Now, thanks to oxidation in the sea air, if you know anything about copper, it'll change to this green color that we, know her as now. But back then she was copper. So you get this brown, black woman welcoming people into the United States, which of course is ironic considering African Americans that are living here already during this time are facing horrible Jim Crow laws. They're getting lynched in the South. But she also stands, to welcome immigrants in. So once you got into this country, immigrants had to pass a health examination. You guys are living in the era of COVID, so you know that we can't just be letting anyone come in. Anybody could bring these diseases in and it could create a pandemic. So you have to make sure that people coming over here are healthy and they're not going to spread disease. Once they passed the health inspection, they had to meet with like a cop or an inspector. And they would ask them all sorts of questions. They had to make sure they weren't a criminal. They had to make sure they were able-bodied, they could work. I mean, we don't want handicapped people over here being bums on the street. We want able-bodied people that can provide and, contribute to our society. And of course, you had to have some money because when you move somewhere, you can't just stay on the street till you find a job. You have to be able to put yourself in a hotel or a motel or whatever until you find steady work. So they had to have at least some money when they were moving. Now, put a star or circle around the word nativism. Many Americans express nativism. That's a fancy way of saying racism. And they viewed immigrants with a sense of fear and hostility. And it's super ironic because unless you're 100% Native American, everybody's families came from another country. So it's ironic that these sons of immigrants, as you can see in this political cartoon, their shadows are showing you that they were former immigrants or they're the sons of immigrants, are not welcoming to the new immigrants themselves. It's very hypocritical, which America is very hypocritical when it comes to this stuff. And of course, they accuse these new immigrants of taking away, quote unquote, real jobs from Americans, which is not true either. But you're going to see the population American public calling for quotas from the government. So looking at this map, give some adjectives to describe what cities were like in the Gilded Age. So the Gilded Age experienced massive urbanization. Circle that word. Urbanization is a really fancy way of saying cities. And so what is happening is in 1850, only 15% of the American population lived in cities. Most people still lived in farms. They lived out in their own land. But thanks to the growth of our economy and businesses and factories, by 1900, 40% of the American population is going to move into cities. And city growth was due to the fact that not only rural Americans are leaving farms and coming to the city looking for a new opportunity, but also immigrants are coming from, Europe, and they're coming in and looking for jobs as well, and they're coming to the city for those jobs. So cities just exploded, and thank goodness for, innovations such as steel and things of that nature, because we no longer have to build our cities out. We are now building our cities upwards as well. And so skyscrapers are going to lead to the modern American city skylines during this time. And most cities, they're all built the same. If you notice, it's going to, you go to downtown Kansas City or downtown Nashville or downtown Austin or San Antonio, wherever you are, and you'll notice the skyscrapers are always in the middle of the city. And then around those skyscrapers are like typically apartments where people that live in this city, dwell. And then outside of the city around them are suburbs. So, most cities are built like that for a reason, because everyone travels into the city for work and then disperses and leaves the city after they're done. That's why traffic typically is bad going into the city in the morning, and it's bad leaving the city in the afternoon. Now, of course, as cities grew larger, they're able to create new systems of transportation. In Chicago, as you're looking at the picture on the bottom and the left, they're known for their rail lines, and these are elevated above sidewalks, so these trains can go through no problem. In San Francisco, the top picture, you've got trolleys that take people around because it's great weather. I've been on a trolley before. It's beautiful. It's super fun. If you ever have the chance to go to San Francisco, definitely hop on one of those. They're typically red, and it's just a great way to travel through the city without having to use a car. So most American cities are not prepared for this rapid growth, as I said. Most urban immigrants lived in tenements. I would circle that word. You will see it on your quiz. And tenements are these low-rent apartment complexes in the poorest part of towns. And if you look at the picture, you're going to have situations of families of 10 sharing a one-bedroom, one living room apartment, and then across from the hall from them, if you're looking at this picture, there'd be another family of 10 living in that one-bedroom apartment. And so there'd be 40 people on one floor, and they're sharing maybe one bathroom. These are families you don't know. You could have an Italian family, a Polish family, and an English family all living in the same unit and not be able to communicate with each other, but having to share the same utilities. And it's really sad. These apartments, we're not dealing in a time, AC hasn't been invented. So in the summer, these apartments are stagnant, they're hot, they're disgusting. People are only bathing once, maybe twice a week. 60% of immigrant babies died before their first birthday because the air in these tenements is so poisonous and so awful. So, it's very difficult life for these people coming over here trying to make a way. Now, about 2/3 of immigrants settled in cities such as New York, Chicago, Boston, or Philadelphia, and they lived in ethnic neighborhoods called enclaves. And I'd circle that word enclave. And so think about the reasons. Why would these people who moved from other countries go into cities and look for, the Italians came and looked for the Italian side of New York. The English came and they formed their side. The Chinese even would come over and they'd go into an enclave. And so you think all these people would move into the same part of town together because it provides a sense of community. It's really hard to move to a country where you don't know the language, you don't know the customs, and you're expected to navigate and find a job. And so these enclaves provided a sense of community. Immigrants were surrounded by familiar customs, food, and language of their homeland. And if you go to places like New York City today, there's a Puerto Rican side, there's a Dominican side. You go to the Chinese section of New York City, a lot of the signs aren't even in English, they're in Mandarin or whatever language that these Chinese people are reading and writing in. And so that's why some cities have sections like that. Now, based off of these pictures, what were working conditions like in the Gilded Age? The majority of immigrants worked in industrial jobs, which means they're working in factory jobs. And industries are growing rapidly and they need cheap workers. And it's easy to teach someone who doesn't speak English how to work a factory because they're going to be doing the same job all day long. It's very repetitive. It's very boring. You stick them in there. You show them the couple of moves they have to make to keep the factory running. And so these unskilled immigrants were willing to take these factory jobs, no matter how unattractive, dangerous, or low paying they were, because some money is better than no money at all. And that's kind of their mindset. Now, what problems did workers face in the Gilded Age? And looking at this political cartoon, look at the bottom portion, look who's sitting on top, look if you can see if you can tell which industrialists and which millionaires are sitting on these money bags. So in response to low wages, long hours, and dangerous working conditions, many workers joined labor unions. And what a labor union is, it's basically an organization or a club where workers get together and they go to the boss and say, if you don't give in to our demands, we will go on strike. We will not work until you provide us with what we need to continue working. And so among the first labor unions in America was the Knight of Labor. And this is a really unique labor union because it was open to all workers, regardless of your race, gender, or skill, which is crazy. So if you look at the picture, you've got an African-American man that's in the lead, like helping lead this union, which is almost unheard of during this time, because if white workers weren't getting paid, black workers were getting paid even less. And the most successful union, unfortunately, is going to be the AFL. As great as the Knights of Labor was at being inclusive and allowing everyone, the AFL, which is going to be led by Samuel Gompers, is going to be a little bit more effective. And the reason for that is it only included skilled workers and white people and men only. So those demographics are what, America to this day really cares about the most. And so they were able, when they would, go on strike or whatever, they were able to gain better pay, shorter hours, and better working conditions simply because the group of people that were involved were more powerful in society during this time, the white skilled worker, male. And like you can see in this picture over here, look at these guys are dressed in suits. So these are not, uneducated poor men. These are people that know what they're doing when they're bargaining. And that's why they are going to be very successful when they decide to go on strike, unlike many of the others that you're going to see when we do the progressive era, and we talk more about strikes. Now, by the end of the Gilded Age, only 4% of all American workers are unionized, and there's a really good reason for that. So if you look at this political cartoon, look at the words on the golden horse, look at who's being represented on the donkey, look at the tiny words that are carved into like the hammer and into the shield of the knight on the train, and just try to think about what the political cartoonist is trying to depict to you or show you in this cartoon. So one of the tactics used by unions was to strike. I've already talked about this. Basically, what you're trying to do is if you stop working, the owner of the company is going to lose money. And so, he doesn't want that. So he would rather be willing to work with you and get it settled quickly so production can keep going and he can keep making money. However, you've got to remember that during this era, we've got so many immigrants coming from different parts of Europe that when you would go on strike, the business owners would typically just fire you and hire the next boatload of immigrants that was coming in, because during this era, the union and the strikers are not protected by the law like they are today. So understand that big difference is back then they're not protected by the government. So during some of these strikes, violence broke out. And people were dying. Think about the protests and the issues that have been going on recently with like the Black Lives Matter and the Breonna Taylor situation. It would get that violent at some of these strikes because these people are so frustrated that there's no change. And one of the worst ones was the Chicago Haymarket strike. I definitely put a star around this section of notes. What they wanted, it seems very simple to y'all because an 8-hour day, you're like, well, we have that. But back then, remember, factory owners could work their people 16, 18, how many hours a day they wanted. And if you complained, then you just got fired. And so as they're trying to strike, violence broke out. And there was a bomb that went off, and people turned against the unions. They saw them as very un-American. They saw them as violent. They saw them as inappropriate. And they basically wanted people to shut up and just do their jobs. But these people are working in very unsafe conditions and very long hours for very, very little pay. So you have to understand both sides of the situation. Did we also get the Homestead strike in 1892 at Carnegie's steel plant? Remember, Carnegie treated his workers terribly. Federal troops were called in. So you get a situation where the military comes, breaks up this strike, and forces these people back to work. And when they don't want to go back to work, Carnegie just gets replacement workers. Like, all right, fine, you don't want to come back in, that's fine, stay outside. I will just hire new people because they really want, this money and this opportunity. Railroad workers are going to be some of the most frustrated groups of people because, as you know, the railroad companies are expanding in this country. It's the #1 way to travel during the Gilded Age. And one of the biggest strikes was at the Pullman Palace Company. Remember, the Pullman Palace Company built those luxury cars that we looked at a little while ago in a previous slideshow. President Cleveland sent the army. So the presidents are on the sides of the big businessmen right now. He sent the army to end the strike and realized the strike had spread to 27 states. Dozens and dozens of people had died. And they one situation, you can see in the picture up there, it got so bad that they just set all these rail cars on fire. They were so angry. Another picture, you can see the guns and the rocks being thrown into the crowd. It would get really violent. So what problems did the government face in the Gilded Age? Well, the government had that laissez-faire policy. So here's the thing. In the Gilded Age, we're dealing in an era of political corruption at not just the state level, but also at the national level as well. So from our president all the way down to the mayors of town, we get a situation where everyone's being paid off, as you can see in this political cartoon, by big businessmen. Many city governments were run by political machines. Political machine is basically a mafia. And these mafia bosses were super powerful. They controlled not only the city themselves, but they controlled the politicians as well. Nothing went done without these mafia bosses okay and their signature on the bottom line. These political machines or these mafias rallied. They were really good about getting citizens involved And here's how they got their power. What these political bosses would do is they would greet immigrants as they were coming off the boats, and these immigrants barely speak English. They would give these immigrants food and kind of butter them up, and then they would tell these immigrants who to vote for. Like, look, all these things I did for you to help you when you got to America, now I need you to go vote for this politician. And so these politicians would go to the mafia to help get votes. And when the politician got elected, they owed the mafia bosses. And so these mafia bosses went untouched. These political machines went untouched because they were the ones getting people elected. And they would bribe people. They controlled how the cities were built, building projects, and it was crazy how powerful these political machines are because they controlled the voting in the cities. And in New York City, these political machines were very bad. Boston had some of the worst political machines in the nation, and so they would just use fraud to win elections. And I mean, you guys are living again in 2020, 2021, 2022, and you know how corrupt politics can be. So this shouldn't be anything new to you. Now, the most notorious urban boss, I'd put a star by this right here, is going to be Boss Tweed. And the name of his political machine is Tammany Hall. If you ever watch a movie during this time period and it's set in New York, you've probably heard Tammany Hall before. That's the name of his mafia crew. And they run New York City like no one's business. They defraud the city out of millions of dollars. Basically, what they would do is they would say, they go to the mayor and be like, look, this building's going to cost $3 million to build. And so the mayor would give Boss Tweed $3 million. In reality, the building would only be like $1 million to build. And so Boss Tweed and his political machine would pocket the other $2 million. And that's how they were taking millions from the city. They were writing these illegal contracts and charging more for projects than they were actually worth. So another big issue that was happening at the time was not only were political machines running huge cities, you have a situation called patronage going on. And I put a circle around that P word at the very end of the top bullet. Patronage is a way of saying basically government officials were giving their friends, neighbors, and relatives jobs in the government, which can be a very bad thing because government positions are supposed to be very important, but if you're just giving them to someone because you like them or because they're related to you, that doesn't mean that person is going to do a good job. And so fortunately, in 1883, the Pendleton Act was passed, and again, I probably circled that as well. And what it did, it created a merit-based exam. Merit means you earn this position by your own merit. Someone does not give it to you, it means you're worthy. Think about trying out for the football team. Okay, if you become the varsity starting quarterback, you did it by merit, not because, you were the son of the coach. And so these things mean that the Pendleton Act forces anyone taking a government job to take a test to prove they're qualified. This is true to this day. In order to become a teacher, which I actually have technically a government job because I'm paid by, through taxes, I had to pass many exams, to be honest with you. If you go into the Army, you have to continually take tests and exams to prove that you're worth being, getting that next rank. Same thing for the fire department. They have to take a physical exam. I mean, any government job you have, you will take a civil service exam to get that job. Now, look at the names, the presidents from 18 to 25, and I highly doubt many of you have even heard of some of these presidents because they were so useless, to be honest with you. From Ulysses S. Grant all the way to William McKinley, these presidents were just not powerful. I mean, to be honest with you, the people that were running this country during this time are people like Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and Rockefeller. These industrialists, these billionaires, not these presidents, because these billionaires are what are deciding, who to support for office, and they're giving these senators money to make sure that they don't make any laws to break up their monopoly. So these presidents are pretty weak during this time. Now, unfortunately, Ulysses S. Grant, who was the general of the Union Army during the Civil War, he became president after the Civil War was over. He was plagued by scandals. My goodness. I would go ahead and circle Credit Mobilier. That's the scandal where basically the people, his cabinet, as you can see in this picture, were bribing railroad companies and giving them grand lands that belong to the U.S. government, not to them personally, which is illegal. You can't give away government land. And then in the whiskey ring situation, these whiskey companies, these liquor companies were bribing government officials so they didn't have to pay taxes, because liquor takes more taxes. There's such thing as an alcohol tax. And so they were avoiding paying taxes by saying, hey, Senator Senator Johnson, here's $100. Wink, wink, I paid my taxes this year, so don't come audit me. And these scandals plagued his presidency. Now, there were some great things that happened this morning. There were some great things that happened during the Gilded Age. Sorry, I'm doing this in the morning. I'm tired. As far as leisure time goes, this is a situation where we get like a lot of organized sports are developed, which is awesome. You got boxing, you get baseball, the American, pastime, which is, to me, is so boring. Oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine sitting at a baseball game, especially back in the day when it was segregated and it was all just white people running around, probably super slow, no offense, just kidding. All right, so while working and living conditions were very difficult, the middle class in America, which was small during this time, but there was a middle class, actually saw their work time decrease. They're making more money and they're spending less time at work. And so when you're not at work all the time, you look for things to fill your time. Think about the things you do when you go home. Some of you guys play video games. Some of you get on Netflix and stream, shows for 6 hours. Some of you, sit on your phone from 3 to 1 in the morning. So they're looking for things to do. So this is a time where we get like amusement parks are built. Wooden roller coasters were invented during this time period. I'm not riding one because I'm not crazy, but these people were. Bicycling became a big thing, unicycling, vaudeville shows. These are like variety shows people would go to. Sports such as baseball and boxing became very big. I just wanted to point out some of the good things that did happen during the Gilded Age. Now, conclusion. We see a huge increase in Eastern European immigrants during this time looking for a better opportunity at life. And the Industrial Revolution created jobs for them to come to America and to help build this country. These new immigrants swarmed. A lot of them, like I said, came from Eastern and Southern Europe. It caused urbanization and a very crowded city situation. However, it stimulated industry. We get a modernized city landscape. We get skyscrapers, we get trolleys. Eventually, we're going to get stoplights and street signs and things of that nature. But next unit, we're going to be looking at the terrible conditions of these poor workers and why in today's world, you guys have better conditions. Someone had to fight to get you guys an 8-hour workday and a minimum wage. So we're going to take a look at the people that did that for you and for me as well in the next unit, because these poor immigrants were just living in squalor and horrible conditions at work. And so we're definitely in the progressive era going to take a look at how that changed and why that changed.